This is one of those weeks when I wasn't exactly sure what to say. It seems to me, as people have talked to me, that we want the world to make sense. We want the world to make sense. We want good people to win. It would also help if good people actually ran for office. We want truth to shine and things to happen. And these are human hopes, and those hopes matter. But when those hopes harden into certainty, or when we cling to them to avoid grief and fear, they can also become something else. And the Torah asks us, what if the most dangerous thing that we carry is not anger, is not doubt? What if the most dangerous thing that we carry is our illusion? This week's Torah portion, the story of Korach, is not just about rebellion against Moses and Aaron. This week's Torah portion is about what people do when dreams dissolve. Now, after the Israelites let fear override faith and refused to enter the land of Israel, they were told that they were going to not reach the promised land. Rather, their generation would wander and die in the desert so a new generation could enter the promised land. And it is precisely then that rebellion took root. Because when people feel betrayed, that what they had hoped for wouldn't work out, and when people felt betrayed that what they had walked towards wasn't going to work out, they don't always cry. Sometimes they look for people to blame. And sometimes they look for fantasy to follow. And this is where magical thinking enters. Magical thinking is the impulse to reject hard truth in favor of comforting lies and easy answers. It is the fantasy that says America can be restored by sheer strength and nostalgia, that truth is whatever your side repeats the loudest, or that loyalty to a leader matters more than loyalty to a democracy. It is also the fantasy that progressive values alone will protect the vulnerable, that anti-Semitism cannot exist in movements of justice, or that intentions matter more than their outcomes. It is the fantasy that lets us pretend Iran's aggression is just posturing, that Hamas is a liberation movement, that anti-Semitism will fade if we Jews just stay quiet, or that war can be waged without moral cost. Fantasy allows us to shift blame, to avoid responsibility, to deny danger even when the evidence is clear. Now, we see the impulse not only in global conflict, but in our own cities. In perhaps recent elections, some leaders tapped into real pain, rising rents, economic despair, the sense that the system no longer serves most people. But when that urgency is paired with rhetoric that erases Jewish safety or downplays anti-Semitism, many are tempted to ignore the contradiction. Because we're asked to flatten nuance, pick a side, and silence the ache that does not fit the story. That, too, is magical thinking. The belief that we can erase one truth to serve another. Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, of blessed memory, warned that magical thinking wears many faces. It can appear as religious extremism. It can appear as utopian politics. It can appear as cynical denial. It is the illusion that if we shout loud enough or shame forcefully enough, we can make the complexity just go away. And it's not like Moses, our tradition's greatest prophet, had it right either. Because in this Torah portion, in a rare moment, Moses breaks, not from arrogance, but from hurt. He takes the rebellion against his leadership personally. And who wouldn't? Because the people he had led through fire and wilderness now call for his head. They are angry not just at him, but at the world that no longer makes any sense. So Moses calls for a miracle, something large enough to end the pain. He asks for the earth, to open up and swallow all of the rebellion. And the rebels fall, but the people do not stop weeping. Their grief is not cured. Their fear remains, because pain cannot be swallowed, no matter how deep the ground opens up. What quieted the storm was not some punishment. It was a branch, dry, still, and in classic desert form, kind of unremarkable. That is, until it bloomed. It was the staff of Aaron. Aaron's staff did not thunder. It didn't offer a spectacle. It was a dead piece of wood that all of a sudden started to bloom and bore almonds. This was not magic. It was not fantasy. It was something else entirely. Life emerging from where no one expected it to emerge from. A quiet sign that leadership does not need to dominate to be real, that the truth does not need to shout to be heard. Now, it didn't erase people's pain, but it invited them to see again, to imagine that something sacred could still grow even in the aftermath of loss. And this is the message that I want to elevate on this Shabbat, when I found it kind of difficult to think of what to say. When the world becomes too painful to face, people reach out for fantasy. We see it all around us. These are not fantasies born of ignorance. They are born of grief. The story people trusted and hoped for has collapsed. The dream is gone, and that no one is naming that loss for real. The people in Korach's time were not just rebelling, they were mourning the future that they would never see, mourning the promise they could no longer believe in. And when grief has no place to go, it often turns to blame. And when grief has no place to go and it turns to blame, it begs for magic. But leadership, real leadership, does not come through miracles. It comes through authentic presence, through attention, through the courage to stay and tell the truth when others retreat into easy but unnuanced sound bites. If we want to face this moment with integrity, if we want to face this moment with strength, we cannot offer magic. We must offer instead imagination. We must offer space for grief that does not collapse into rage and a future that does not require fantasy to feel possible. This is not a time for strongmen or slogans. It is a time for telling the truth, making space for sorrow, and choosing to imagine anyway. Not because we're not wish is actually all about. Imagination refuses to let fear write our future. It dares to picture a world where safety does not depend on domination, where dignity is not a zero-sum game, and where our children inherit a story that is more honest, more just, and more whole than the one that we were given. That is not magical thinking. That is courage. That is leadership. That is daring hope. And it's precisely what we need right now. Shabbat Shalom.